The conference room at Daehan Publishing felt like a courtroom, and Jennifer Johnson was the defendant. Director Kim Sung-ho held her manuscript between his fingers like contaminated evidence, his eyes scanning the room of 12 executives who hadn't looked directly at her once since she'd entered. The only sound was the aggressive tapping of his Mont Blanc pen against the mahogany table. "Miss Johnson." Kim's voice carried the weight of institutional authority. "Your story about racial identity in America is provocative. However, we question whether Korean readers can connect with such foreign experiences." His pause was surgical. "Moreover, we wonder if a foreign author can truly grasp the cultural nuances required for our sophisticated market." Jennifer felt every microscopic shift in the room's atmosphere. 12 pairs of eyes avoided hers, but she caught the nervous swallow from the marketing director, the way the senior editor's fingers drummed silently against his thigh. Only Park Jae-won, sitting at the far end of the table, had the courage to meet her gaze. Behind his wire-rimmed glasses, she saw something that looked dangerously like solidarity. "Director Kim." Jae-won's voice cut through the suffocating silence, his formal tone barely containing tremors of suppressed anger. "Perhaps the question isn't whether our readers can understand her story, but whether we've been underestimating what they're hungry to hear." The betrayal was complete. Kim's pen stopped mid-tap, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the manuscript. Jennifer realized in that crystalline moment that Jae-won had just committed professional suicide for a woman he barely knew, and the weight of that sacrifice felt heavier than all her years of rejection combined. "Mr. Park?" Kim's voice could have frozen summer rain. "Are you suggesting that this company's editorial judgment has been inadequate?" Jae-won removed his glasses with deliberate slowness. Cleaning them with the methodical precision Jennifer had learned meant he was fighting an internal war. When he looked up, his dark eyes held the dangerous clarity of a man with nothing left to lose. "I'm suggesting, Director Kim, that maybe it's time we stopped being afraid of stories that make us uncomfortable." The manuscript slammed shut with a sound like a coffin lid closing. But as Jennifer watched Kim's face contort with barely controlled fury, she caught something else, the faintest tremor in his jaw that suggested this wasn't over. What happened next would either destroy them both or change everything they thought they knew about love, courage, and the price of speaking truth in a world built on beautiful lies. If the person you're meant to love could cost you everything you've worked for, would you still choose them? And what if that choice meant confronting not just society's prejudices, but the darkest secrets from your own past? 6 months earlier, Jennifer had emerged from Incheon Airport into a Seoul downpour that seemed designed to wash away whatever remained of her former life. She was the only black passenger in a sea of umbrellas, clutching a worn leather suitcase and a manuscript that represented 3 years of her soul bleeding onto paper. The academic scandal at Columbia had stripped away her tenure, her reputation, and her faith in the American dream, but it hadn't touched her words. The apartment in Hongdae was barely larger than her old office, but it had 2 things she needed: solitude and a view of a city that didn't know her mistakes. As rain streaked down her window, her phone buzzed with a message that made her hands shake. "Seoul won't hide you forever. You know what you did. M. Marcus." Even here, 8,000 miles from the life she'd abandoned, his shadow found her. Jennifer deleted the message and opened her laptop. If she was going to disappear, she would do it by telling the one story she'd never had the courage to write, the truth about what it meant to be black and brilliant in a world that preferred her grateful and quiet. She wrote until sunrise painted the Seoul skyline in shades of hope she'd forgotten existed. But hope, she would soon learn, was just another word for the calm before everything fell apart. The cafe in Gangnam where she'd agreed to meet the young editor felt like neutral territory. Expensive enough to suggest legitimacy, casual enough to escape quickly if needed. Jennifer arrived 15 minutes early, a habit carved by years of being the only black face in rooms that hadn't expected her. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, structured blazer over simple blouse, professional but not intimidating, foreign but respectful. Park Jae-won entered precisely on time, and Jennifer's first thought was that he looked impossibly young. Wire-rimmed glasses framed serious dark eyes. His navy suit was impeccable except for a slightly loosened tie that suggested either rebellion or nervousness. He bowed with automatic precision, but when he spoke, his English carried the crisp confidence of expensive education. "Miss Johnson, thank you for meeting me. I'll be direct. We receive hundreds of manuscripts from foreign authors. Most demonstrate a fundamental misunderstanding of Korean literary sensibilities." He settled into his chair with the measured movements of someone performing a familiar ritual. "Your query letter, however, suggested something different." Jennifer leaned forward, letting a small smile play at her lips. "Mr. Park, before you tell me what Korean readers want, perhaps you should consider what they need." She switched to Korean, her pronunciation careful but fluent. Kim Suo said that literature should be a mirror that shows society its hidden face. "I think Korean readers are ready to see themselves in ways their publishers haven't dared to imagine." The effect was immediate. Jae-won's hand froze halfway to his coffee cup, his composed expression cracking to reveal something raw underneath. "You studied Korean literature?" "I studied survival," Jennifer replied, returning to English. "And sometimes the best way to survive in a new world is to understand the stories that built it." She slid a printed chapter across the small table. "This is about a woman who discovers that the American dream was never meant for someone who looks like her. But it's also about a country struggling to define itself in a global world. I think your readers might recognize that feeling." Jae-won's fingers brushed hers as he took the pages, and the brief contact sent an unexpected current through the professional distance between them. As he read, Jennifer watched his expressions shift from skeptical to surprised to something that looked dangerously like recognition. When he finally looked up, his eyes held a vulnerability that made her chest tighten. "How do you know about the adoption statistics in Korean American families?" The question landed like a stone in still water, rippling outward with implications Jennifer hadn't expected. She'd researched Korean adoption for her novel's subplot, but the pain in Jae-won's voice suggested she'd stumbled onto something deeply personal. "Research," she said quietly, "but also intuition. Some wounds leave scars even when they heal invisibly." Jae-won cleaned his glasses again, and Jennifer filed away the gesture, a tell that would become important later. When he replaced them, his professional mask was back in place, but the cracks were still visible. "I'd like to read your complete manuscript," he said. "But I should warn you, Director Kim has very particular opinions about foreign authors, especially those who..." He gestured vaguely, clearly struggling with polite phrasing. "Who look like me." Jennifer's voice carried no accusation, just weary understanding. "Who challenge comfortable assumptions," Jae-won corrected, and something in his tone suggested he'd been doing his own challenging lately. As they stood to leave, Jennifer made a decision that would change everything. "Mr. Park, would you like to know the real reason I came to Seoul?" The rain had started again, and they stood under the cafe's awning like actors waiting for their cue. Jae-won nodded, and Jennifer took a breath that felt like stepping off a cliff. I'm not just running towards something. I'm running away from someone who tried to destroy me for telling the truth." She opened her umbrella, a black one that would become their symbol. "The question is whether Korea will be brave enough to publish the story that America was too afraid to let me tell." She walked away, leaving Jae-won standing in the rain with her chapter in his hands and questions that would keep him awake for weeks. Jae-won read Jennifer's novel in his apartment that night, the Seoul skyline glittering beyond his floor-to-ceiling windows like fallen stars. He'd intended to skim through it professionally, making notes about marketability and cultural sensitivity. Instead, he found himself pulled into a narrative that felt like looking into a mirror he hadn't known existed. The protagonist was Sarah Kim, a Korean-American woman who discovered her birth parents had given her up not out of poverty, but shame. Shame at having a child who would never be Korean enough for Korea or American enough for America. The parallels to his own adoption story were so precise they felt invasive, as if Jennifer had somehow accessed his therapy sessions and childhood nightmares. But it was the secondary character, Marcus, the charming academic who slowly revealed himself as a master manipulator, that made Jae-won's blood run cold. The way Marcus undermined Sarah's confidence, isolated her from friends, then positioned himself as her only salvation was textbook emotional abuse. And the academic scandal that destroyed Sarah's career, complete with planted evidence and anonymous accusations, felt too specific to be pure fiction. At 3 a.m., Jae-won called his mother. Eun-jung answered on the first ring, as if she'd been expecting crisis. "Jae-wona, why are you calling so late?" Her voice carried the particular tension of a mother who'd spent 30 years expecting disaster. "Iyama, do you ever wonder about my birth parents? About why they really gave me up?" The silence stretched long enough for him to hear his own heartbeat. When Eun-jung finally spoke, her words carried the careful precision of a woman walking through a minefield. "Son, some questions are too dangerous to ask. Some truths are too heavy for one person to carry." A pause. "Why are you asking this now?" Jae-won stared at Jennifer's manuscript, at the final chapter where Sarah discovered her birth mother had been forced to choose between her daughter and her family's honor. "I think I met someone who understands heavy truths. Be careful, Jae-wona. Some people carry their pain like weapons." After hanging up, Jae-won couldn't shake the feeling that his mother knew more than she'd admitted. He made a decision that would prove catastrophic. He began researching Jennifer's background, telling himself it was professional due diligence, while knowing it was something far more personal and dangerous. What he discovered in the Columbia University archives made him understand why she'd run so far, and why someone named Marcus Thompson was still trying to drag her back. The second meeting was at Director Kim's insistence, held in the company's formal conference room to establish proper hierarchy. Jennifer arrived wearing her professional armor, tailored jacket, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a way that suggested competence without threat. But Jae-won could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers drummed silently against her leather notebook. "Miss Johnson," Director Kim began without preamble. "Mr. Park has shared portions of your work with our editorial committee. While we appreciate the craft involved, we have concerns about cultural authenticity." Jennifer's green eyes sharpened, but her voice remained level. "Could you be more specific about these concerns, Director Kim?" "Well," Kim steepled his fingers, a gesture Jae-won recognized as preparation for character assassination. "Your portrayal of Korean family dynamics seems based on Western stereotypes rather than authentic understanding. The adoption subplot, in particular, demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of Korean cultural values. Jae-won felt his chest tighten. Kim was using his personal trauma as ammunition against Jennifer, and she had no way to defend herself without revealing information Jae-won had shared in confidence. The manipulation was elegant and cruel, exactly what he'd expected from his supervisor. "Director Kim," Jennifer said quietly, "I spent 6 months interviewing Korean adoptees in America before writing those scenes. Every detail was verified with cultural consultants." She opened her notebook, revealing pages of meticulous research. Perhaps the issue isn't authenticity, but comfort with authentic portrayals. The room's temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kim's composed expression cracked slightly, revealing the fury underneath. "Miss Johnson, are you suggesting that our editorial judgment is compromised by personal bias? I'm suggesting that sometimes the most authentic stories are the ones that make us most uncomfortable." Jae-won watched Jennifer commit what in Korean corporate culture amounted to professional suicide, and felt something break open in his chest. Here was a woman willing to burn every bridge rather than compromise her truth, and he'd been complicit in Kim's attempt to silence her. "Director Kim," Jae-won heard himself say, "I'd like to formally recommend Jennifer's manuscript for publication." The silence that followed was deafening. Kim's eyes narrowed to slits, and Jennifer's head snapped toward Jae-won with an expression of surprise and something that might have been gratitude. "Mr. Park," Kim's voice could have etched glass, "I believe you're allowing personal feelings to cloud your professional judgment. With respect, sir, I believe my judgment has never been clearer." Kim stood slowly, his movements carrying the weight of institutional power. "Miss Johnson, thank you for your time. We'll be in touch." The dismissal was absolute. As they gathered their things, Kim's final words followed them out. "Mr. Park, please stay behind. We have matters to discuss." In the hallway, Jennifer caught Jae-won's arm. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," he said, removing his glasses to clean them. "I did." And in that moment, they both understood that everything had changed, though neither could predict the cost of what they'd just set in motion. The storm hit Seoul like divine punishment, turning the city into a watercolor painting where everything bled into everything else. Jennifer had been walking aimlessly through Hongdae, trying to process the meeting's aftermath, when the first drops began. By the time she reached the 24-hour bookstore, she was soaked through and shivering. She pushed through the glass doors into warm light and the smell of paper and possibility. The store was nearly empty except for a few insomniacs and one familiar figure hunched over a philosophy section. Jae-won, looking as lost as she felt. "Following me?" she asked, wringing water from her hair. He looked up with startled eyes. "I come here when I can't sleep. When everything feels..." He gestured vaguely at the books surrounding them. "Complicated." Jennifer settled into the chair across from him, noting the dark circles under his eyes, the way his usually perfect appearance had frayed at the edges. "How bad was it with Kim?" "I'm on probation. Any more lapses in judgment and I'm fired." He laughed, but the sound held no humor. "My mother wants to meet you." "That sounds ominous." "It is." Jae-won closed the book he'd been reading. Marcus Aurelius, Jennifer noted with irony. "She thinks you're dangerous." "She's not wrong." Jennifer pulled her wet jacket tighter. "I destroy things. It's what I do. Ask anyone who's ever tried to help me." "Maybe," Jae-won said quietly. "Some things need to be destroyed." The air between them shifted, charged with more than the storm's electricity. Jennifer found herself studying his face in the bookstore's golden light, the sharp angles of his cheekbones, the vulnerability he tried to hide behind professional competence, the way he looked at her like she was a puzzle he desperately wanted to solve. "Why did you defend me today?" she asked. "Because..." He removed his glasses, setting them carefully on the table between them. "I've spent my entire life being the good Korean son, following rules I never chose, pursuing approval from people who will never see me as enough. And then I met someone who refuses to apologize for taking up space in a world that doesn't want her. Jae-won, I know it's complicated. I know we barely know each other. I know this could destroy both our careers." He leaned forward, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "But I also know that I've never felt more alive than I do when I'm arguing with you in conference rooms." The kiss happened like lightning, sudden, electric, inevitable. Jennifer felt 32 years of careful self-protection crumble as Jae-won's hands cupped her face with reverent gentleness. He tasted like coffee and courage, like all the words she'd been too afraid to write. They broke apart when the flash went off, a camera phone in the hands of someone who'd been pretending to browse the poetry section. The photographer was already running, leaving them frozen in the aftermath of a moment that would soon belong to the world. "How much trouble are we in?" Jennifer whispered. Jae-won's phone was already buzzing with notifications, his face pale as he scrolled through the early social media posts. "All of it," he said quietly. "We're in all the trouble there is." But as the storm raged outside and their world began to collapse, Jennifer realized she'd never felt safer than she did in the wreckage they'd created together. The photo appeared on Seoul's gossip blogs within hours. Rising publishing stars' scandalous foreign romance. The image was crystalline clear. Jennifer and Jae-won locked in an embrace that looked both passionate and desperate, her dark skin stark against his pale hands, the bookstore's golden light creating a halo effect that made them look like star-crossed lovers in a tragic painting. The comments were exactly what Jennifer had expected, but somehow reading them still felt like swallowing glass. Another foreigner trying to climb the social ladder through our men. Disgusting. What's wrong with Korean women? She probably doesn't even speak proper Korean. Someone should check her visa status. But it was the Korean comments that hit harder, because she could read every character of contempt, every carefully crafted insult about her race, her nationality, her worthiness to exist in their homogeneous world. Jae-won appeared at her apartment door at 7 a.m. with coffee and the look of a man who'd aged 10 years overnight. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, wrinkled shirt, unshaven face, hair that suggested he'd been running anxious fingers through it. "I'm sorry," were his first words. "This is my fault." Jennifer took the coffee, noting how his hand shook. "Did you know there was a photographer?" "Of course not." He followed her into the tiny living space, looking around with the careful attention of someone memorizing a place they might never see again. "But I should have been more careful. I should have protected you." "From what? A kiss? From having feelings?" Jennifer sat on her single chair, leaving him the bed or floor. He chose to remain standing, pacing like a caged animal. "Jae-won, I've been dealing with racist assholes my entire life. These comments don't break me. They should anger you." "They do. But anger and breaking are different things." She studied his face, recognizing the particular shade of guilt that came from privilege suddenly made visible. "What did Director Kim say?" "He wants to see me in 2 hours." Jae-won stopped pacing, facing her with the resignation of a man walking to his execution. He made it clear that my continued employment depends on ending this relationship. What relationship? Jennifer's voice carried the dangerous quiet that preceded storms. We shared one kiss, J1. One moment of honesty in a world full of lies. You know it's more than that. Do I? Because right now it feels like you're looking for permission to run away. J1's expression cracked, revealing the pain underneath. I'm trying to figure out how to keep us both safe. Safe? Jennifer stood, her green eyes flashing with the fire that had intimidated Columbia professors and corporate executives alike. I didn't come to Seoul to be safe. I came here to tell the truth, even if it burns everything down. And what about my truth? The words erupted from him with 28 years of suppressed frustration. What about the fact that I've spent my entire life being the perfect Korean son, following every rule, meeting every expectation? And the first time I choose something for myself, it threatens to destroy everything I've built. Then maybe, Jennifer said quietly, what you built wasn't worth saving. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. When Jaewon's phone buzzed with a text from Director Kim, "Don't be late," he gathered himself with visible effort. "I need time to think," he said. "Take all the time you need," Jennifer replied, but her tone suggested he might not have as much as he thought. After he left, Jennifer opened her laptop and began typing. If Seoul was going to tear her apart for one kiss, she might as well give them something worth the destruction. The blog post would go live in 6 hours, and it would change everything they thought they knew about scandal, survival, and the price of speaking truth in a world built on beautiful lies. Jennifer's coffee had gone cold as she stared at her laptop screen, reading the message that shattered her last illusion of safety in Seoul. Sarah Chen, the freelance translator who'd become her closest friend in Korea, had sent a seemingly innocent text. "Can we meet? There's something I need to tell you." The something turned out to be a confession that hit like a physical blow. They met at their usual cafe in Itaewon, the international district where Jennifer could blend in among other foreigners. Sarah's hands shook as she slid a manila envelope across the small table. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, unable to meet Jennifer's eyes. "I'm so fucking sorry." Inside the envelope were photocopies of Jennifer's personal documents, transcripts from their private conversations, detailed reports about her daily routines, emotional state, and relationship with Jaewon. The letterhead at the top made Jennifer's stomach drop. Daehan Publishing Company, Intelligence Division. "How long?" Jennifer's voice was barely above a whisper. "Since you arrived." Kim approached me through my translation agency, said they needed cultural consultation for a foreign author. Sarah's tears were real, but they felt like salt in an open wound. "I didn't know it was surveillance at first. I thought I was just helping you navigate Seoul." "And when did you know?" 2 months ago, when he started asking for specific details about your past, your visa status, your mental health. Sarah finally looked up, her face a mask of misery. "By then, I cared too much about you to stop, but I was too scared to quit." Jennifer flipped through the reports with growing horror. Every vulnerable moment she'd shared with Sarah had been documented, analyzed, weaponized. Her fears about Marcus, her growing feelings for Jaewon, her struggles with Korean social norms, all of it carefully cataloged for Director Kim's use. "There's more," Sarah said quietly. "Kim's planning to have your visa reviewed. He's built a case that you're emotionally unstable and culturally disruptive. He wants you deported before your book becomes a problem." The betrayal was complete, but what hurt most was how perfectly it fit the pattern Jennifer had been running from her entire life. Every time she'd trusted someone, they'd found a way to use that trust against her. Marcus, the Columbia administration, now Sarah, all of them convinced they knew what was best for everyone except Jennifer herself. "Why are you telling me this now?" Jennifer asked. "Because Jae-won doesn't know about the intelligence reports, but Kim's planning to show them to him this afternoon. He wants to prove that you're dangerous, that you manipulate people emotionally." Sarah's voice broke completely. "And because I finally realized that some betrayals are unforgivable, including my own." Jennifer closed the envelope, her mind already calculating exits and alternatives. "How much time do I have?" "Kim called immigration this morning. They'll want to interview you by tomorrow." Sarah reached across the table, her hand hovering over Jennifer's without quite touching. "I know I have no right to ask, but is there anything I can do? Any way to fix this?" "Yes," Jennifer said, standing with the envelope tucked under her arm. "You can stay away from me. And you can live with knowing that the only real friendship you had in this city was the one you sold for a paycheck." As Jennifer walked away, she heard Sarah crying behind her, but the sound felt distant, muffled by the realization that she was truly alone in soul now. Jae-won was about to discover reports that would paint her as an emotional manipulator. Kim had immigration building a deportation case, and Marcus was still out there, waiting for her to run out of places to hide. But as she flagged down a taxi to take her back to Hongdae, Jennifer felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Clarity. She was done running, done hiding, done apologizing for taking up space in a world that had never wanted her anyway. It was time to remember why they'd been afraid of her in the first place. Jae-won sat in Director Kim's office like a defendant awaiting verdict, the manila envelope on the desk between them, feeling heavier than the corporate hierarchy that had shaped his entire career. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seoul stretched endlessly under gray clouds that seemed to mirror the suffocating atmosphere in the room. "Mr. Park," Kim began with the measured tone of a man holding all the cards, "I've been concerned about your recent judgment regarding the foreign author. These documents should clarify why." The first page was Jennifer's psychological evaluation from Columbia University, dated 3 years earlier. Jae-won's hands trembled slightly as he read the clinical description of someone struggling with trust issues stemming from childhood abandonment trauma and difficulty maintaining professional boundaries. The words felt like violations, intimate wounds exposed under fluorescent lights. "This woman," Kim continued, "has a documented history of emotional manipulation. She forms inappropriate attachments to authority figures, then uses vulnerability as a weapon when those relationships become complicated." Page after page detailed Jennifer's relationship with Marcus Thompson, painting a picture of someone who'd crossed professional lines with a senior colleague, then cried harassment when the relationship ended badly. The academic scandal looked different through this lens, not a conspiracy against a brilliant black woman, but the predictable collapse of someone who'd confused personal feelings with professional relationships. "She's doing it again," Kim said quietly. "The same pattern, the same manipulation. She's identified you as someone with authority who might be susceptible to her particular combination of intelligence and vulnerability." Jae-won's chest felt tight, his careful world tilting on its axis. "These are private medical documents. How did you obtain them?" "Through legitimate channels. Miss Chen was hired to provide cultural consultation and psychological assessment." Kim's smile was sharp as winter wind. "Everything we did was within legal boundaries. Sarah was spying on her? Sarah was protecting you and our company." Kim leaned forward, his voice taking on the paternal tone that had shaped Jae-won's career. "Son, I know this is difficult. Manipulation victims always struggle to see the truth, especially when the manipulator is skilled." But as Jae-won read deeper into the reports, inconsistencies began to emerge. The timeline didn't match what Jennifer had told him. The psychological evaluation seemed focused on pathologizing behaviors that could also be interpreted as normal responses to discrimination and betrayal. And the Marcus Thompson described in these documents sounded nothing like the predator Jennifer had described. "I want to hear her side," Jae-won said finally. Kim's expression hardened. "Mr. Park, you're exhibiting classic symptoms of emotional manipulation. The fact that you still want to defend her proves how deeply she's affected your judgment. Or maybe it proves that I care more about truth than corporate politics." The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Kim stood slowly, his movements carrying the weight of institutional power and personal disappointment. "Jae-won," he said, dropping the formal honorifics. "I've known you since you were an intern. I watched you build your career with discipline and intelligence. Don't throw it all away for a woman who sees you as a convenient stepping stone. And what if you're wrong? What if she's exactly who she says she is? Then you're both more naive than I thought." Kim picked up the envelope, his final card. Immigration wants to interview her tomorrow. Her visa status is being reviewed based on evidence of emotional instability and cultural disruption. If you continue this relationship, your career here is finished. Jae-won removed his glasses, cleaning them with methodical precision, while his mind raced through possibilities and consequences. When he replaced them, his reflection in Kim's window looked like a stranger. Someone willing to risk everything for a woman he'd known for 3 months. Director Kim, with all due respect, some risks are worth taking, even when they destroy everything you've worked for. Especially then. As Jae-won left the office, he heard Kim making a phone call in rapid Korean. The last words he caught before the door closed made his blood run cold. "Move up the timeline. We need her gone before she can cause more damage." Racing through Seoul traffic toward Jennifer's apartment, Jae-won realized he was about to discover whether love was strong enough to survive the weight of institutional power, cultural prejudice, and the possibility that everything he thought he knew about the woman he'd fallen for might be carefully constructed lies. But as he ran up the stairs to her door, one thought burned brighter than his doubts. If Jennifer Johnson was playing him, she was the most authentic manipulator he'd ever met. Jennifer's hands were steady as she opened her laptop, but her heart was racing with the particular rhythm that preceded life-altering decisions. The blog post she'd been writing would burn every bridge she had left in Seoul, but bridges built on lies weren't worth preserving anyway. Her phone buzzed with an international call, a number that made her stomach drop even as her finger hovered over the reject button. 3 years of silence, and Marcus Thompson was calling now? The timing felt like destiny's cruel sense of humor. "Hello, Jennifer." His voice was exactly the same, warm, confident, with that undertone of control that had once felt like protection. "You look beautiful in the Seoul photographs. How did you get this number? Baby, you know I have my ways. More importantly, you know I have our ways." The endearment carried the weight of shared history and careful manipulation. "I'm in Seoul. Flew in this morning. I think it's time we talked." The world tilted sideways. Marcus was here, in her sanctuary, contaminating the one place she'd thought was safe from his influence. Through her apartment window, Seoul looked suddenly foreign again, all sharp edges and hidden dangers. "There's nothing to talk about." "Really?" Because I've been watching your little romance drama unfold on social media. Very touching, very public. His laugh was like broken glass. Though I have to say, the Korean boy doesn't seem like your usual type. You destroyed my career, Marcus. You planted evidence, manipulated colleagues, had me investigated by the university board. What more do you want? I want to tell you the truth. Something I should have done 3 years ago. His voice shifted, becoming softer, more vulnerable. Can you meet me? 1 hour, just coffee and conversation. Absolutely not. Jennifer, I have information about the publishing company you're dealing with, about their surveillance of foreign authors, about what they're planning to do to you. A pause. And about what really happened at Columbia. The hook was baited perfectly. Marcus had always known exactly which vulnerabilities to exploit, but something was different this time. 3 years of distance had given Jennifer clarity about his methods, his patterns, his need to be the hero in every story where he'd actually been the villain. If you have something to say it now. Fine. Marcus's tone shifted again, becoming businesslike. The plagiarism charges against you were real. You did use unattributed sources in your dissertation. I didn't plant evidence, I discovered it. The words hit like physical blows. But Jennifer forced herself to keep listening. But I didn't report it through proper channels. I confronted you privately, tried to help you fix it quietly. You refused. You said I was trying to control your work, that I couldn't stand seeing you succeed without my help. His voice cracked slightly. So I made a choice. I reported it to save your reputation before someone else discovered it. That's not what happened. Isn't it? Think about it, Jennifer. Really think about it. Have you ever actually verified the sources I supposedly fabricated? Have you ever looked at the timeline of events without assuming I was the villain? Jennifer's laptop screen blurred as tears she'd refused to cry for 3 years finally broke free. Because the horrible truth was that she couldn't remember anymore. The pain and humiliation of the scandal had tangled her memories, made her doubt her own perceptions. Had she used unattributed sources? Had Marcus really tried to help her first? Why are you telling me this now? Because I love you. Because I've spent 3 years knowing that the woman I wanted to marry thinks I'm a monster. And because the Korean publishing company is about to destroy you the same way Columbia did, by making you doubt your own reality until you have no choice but to run again. Through her window, Jennifer saw a familiar figure approaching her building. Jae-won, moving with the urgent stride of someone carrying bad news. In 30 seconds, he would knock on her door with whatever Kim had told him, whatever lies or truths he'd been fed about her psychological state and romantic history. 1 hour, she heard herself say to Marcus. The cafe in Hongdae where we first met. But after this, we're done. Forever. Thank you, baby. You won't regret this. But as Jennifer ended the call and heard Jae-won's footsteps on the stairs, she realized that regret wasn't the issue. The issue was whether she had the strength to face the truth about Marcus, about herself, and about the possibility that everything she'd built in Seoul was about to collapse around her like a house of cards in a typhoon. The knock on her door was soft but insistent, and through the thin wood she heard Jae-won's voice. Jennifer, we need to talk. She opened the door to find him holding a manila envelope that looked exactly like the one Sarah had shown her hours earlier, his eyes red with exhaustion, and something that looked dangerously like pity. How bad is it? She asked. Bad, he said quietly. But maybe not in the way either of us expected. The cafe where Jennifer first met Jae-won looked different in the harsh light of late afternoon. shadows longer and more menacing. Marcus sat at their old table with the casual confidence of someone who'd never doubted his welcome anywhere. 3 years had been kind to him, still tall and athletic, his expensive casual clothes suggesting the kind of success that came from knowing exactly how to navigate systems designed to exclude others. Jennifer approached with the measured steps of someone walking into a trap they couldn't avoid. Jae-won had wanted to come with her, but she'd refused. Some conversations could only happen between the people who'd lived through the original damage. "You look good," Marcus said, standing to pull out her chair with the courtly manners that had once charmed her. "Soul agrees with you." "Cut the charm, Marcus. You said you had something to tell me. Talk." He settled back into his chair, studying her face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "You're different. Harder. More," he searched for the word, "self-contained. 3 years of rebuilding your life from scratch will do that. Jennifer, I need you to understand something. Everything I did at Columbia, I did because I loved you, even when you couldn't see it." He reached into his jacket, pulling out a manila envelope that made her stomach clench. "But there are things you never knew. Things I kept from you to protect you. I don't need your protection." "Yes, you do. You always have." Marcus opened the envelope, revealing photographs that made Jennifer's world tilt sideways. They showed her in Seoul, walking to cafes, entering Jae-won's building, sitting alone in her apartment. Surveillance photos taken with telephoto lenses from impossible angles. "Who took these?" "I hired a private investigator when you disappeared from New York. I needed to know you were safe." Marcus's voice carried the particular tone of a man who'd convinced himself that stalking was protection. "But what I discovered made me realize how much danger you're really in." The next photo showed Jae-won entering Director Kim's office, followed by images of Sarah Chen meeting with Korean men in expensive suits. Jennifer recognized some faces from Daehan Publishing, but others were unfamiliar. Government officials, based on their formal attire and serious expressions. "Your boyfriend and your best friend have been reporting on you since the day you arrived. Every conversation, every emotional vulnerability, every detail about your past." Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to the intimate register that had once made her feel special. "They're building a case to have you declared mentally unstable and deported. I already know about Sarah, and Jae-won would never, wouldn't he?" Marcus slid another photo across the table. It showed Jae-won leaving Director Kim's office with a manila envelope identical to the one Marcus held. "This was taken yesterday, an hour before he came to see you." Jennifer stared at the image, her carefully rebuilt world cracking along invisible fault lines. The envelope in Jae-won's hands looked exactly like the intelligence reports Sarah had shown her, the psychological evaluations that painted her as an emotional manipulator. "He's been working with them from the beginning," Marcus continued. "The whole romance was orchestrated. Kim identified you as a potential threat and assigned his most promising editor to manage you, keep you distracted while they built their case. That's not possible. Isn't it? Think about it rationally, Jennifer. A successful young Korean editor falls for an older foreign woman with a complicated past, in a culture that barely tolerates interracial relationships. It was always too convenient to be real." But even as Marcus spoke, Jennifer's mind was racing through memories that didn't fit his narrative. Jae-won's genuine surprise when she spoke Korean, his vulnerability when discussing adoption, the way he cleaned his glasses when he was nervous, a tell that couldn't be faked, the risk he'd taken defending her in that first meeting with Kim. "You're lying," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I'm trying to save you. Again. Marcus reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. Come home with me, Jennifer. Tonight. We can be on a plane before they serve the deportation papers. And then what? We go back to New York and pretend the last 3 years never happened? We go back and build the life we should have had. No more running, no more hiding. Just us, the way it was always meant to be. His thumb traced across her knuckles. I know I made mistakes at Columbia. I know I hurt you. But I've spent 3 years learning how to be the man you deserved all along. Jennifer looked at Marcus's handsome face, at the photographs spread between them, at the promise of a life without the constant struggle of existing as a foreign body in a culture that barely tolerated her presence. It would be so easy to believe him, to let him be the hero who saved her from her own poor judgment. But as she sat in that Soul Cafe, she realized that the woman who'd fled America 3 years ago wouldn't have questioned Marcus's narrative. That woman had been so desperate for validation, so convinced of her own unworthiness, that she'd accepted his version of reality even when it didn't match her lived experience. This woman, the one who'd survived alone in Seoul, who'd written a novel that stripped her soul bare, who'd found the courage to love someone despite every reason not to. This woman knew the difference between protection and possession. Marcus, she said quietly, pulling her hands back. I need to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth. Of course. The day you reported my plagiarism to the university board, did you really try to help me fix it first? Something flickered across his face, too quick to interpret but too distinct to miss. Jennifer, you know I did. I spent weeks trying to convince you to address the issues privately. Then why don't I remember those conversations? Because you were under enormous stress, finishing your dissertation, applying for tenure-track positions. You weren't thinking clearly. Or, Jennifer said, standing with the photographs still scattered between them, you're lying now the same way you lied then. And the only difference is that I'm finally strong enough to see it. As she walked away from the table, Marcus's voice followed her. Jennifer, wait. If you leave now, if you trust him over me, you'll lose everything again. She paused at the cafe door, looking back at the man who'd shaped 3 years of her life with his careful manipulations. Maybe, she said quietly, but I'll lose it as myself this time, not as someone else's version of who I should be. The rain had started again, Seoul's autumn sky weeping as if the city itself mourned the lies being stripped away. Jennifer stood under the cafe awning, her phone buzzing with messages from Jae-won. Where are you? Immigration called. We need to talk. Now. The pieces were falling into place with devastating clarity. Marcus's photos, Sarah's betrayal, Kim's deportation case, all of it orchestrated to isolate her, to make her doubt her own perceptions until running back to America seemed like the only safe choice. But safety, she'd learned in Seoul, wasn't the same as survival. And survival required choosing truth over comfort, even when truth felt like walking naked through a thunderstorm. Her taxi ride to Jae-won's office passed in a blur of neon and rain-slicked streets. Seoul looked foreign again, all sharp edges and hidden meanings. But this time Jennifer didn't feel like an intruder. She felt like a woman who'd finally learned to read the language of manipulation fluently enough to refuse its translation. The elevator to the 38th floor carried her up through layers of corporate hierarchy and cultural expectation, but when the doors opened, she stepped out as Jennifer Johnson, not the grateful foreign author, not the convenient wife figure, not the damaged woman seeking redemption. just herself, with all her contradictions and strengths, and the hard-won wisdom of someone who'd survived being everyone else's project. Jae-won's office felt like a courtroom when she entered, with Kim Sung-ho seated across from Jae-won's desk, like a prosecutor presenting his case. Between them lay manila envelopes, official documents, and the particular tension that preceded life-altering confrontations. "Ah, Miss Johnson," Kim said with predatory satisfaction. "Perfect timing. We were just discussing your situation." Jae-won's face was carved from stone, his eyes unreadable behind his glasses. "Jennifer, sit down. Please." "I'll stand." Her voice carried the steadiness of someone who'd already made their decision. "Whatever you have to say it." Kim opened one of the envelopes with theatrical precision. "Immigration has reviewed your case based on new information about your psychological stability and cultural integration. They've determined that your visa status should be reassessed." "What new information?" "Reports from cultural consultants, evaluations from Korean colleagues, evidence of emotional manipulation, and professional boundary violations." Kim's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "The pattern is quite clear. You form inappropriate attachments to authority figures, then use vulnerability as a weapon when relationships become complicated." Jennifer looked at Jae-won, searching his face for some sign of the man who'd defended her in boardrooms, who'd kissed her in bookstores, who'd looked at her like she was worth fighting for. "Did you write these reports?" "Jennifer, did you?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seoul continued its eternal dance of ambition and survival, while inside, two people discovered whether love was strong enough to survive the weight of institutional manipulation and carefully orchestrated doubt. "I provided information when asked," Jae-won said finally, "about your professional background, your adaptation to Korean culture, your..." He struggled with the words. "Your emotional patterns." "What kind of emotional patterns?" Kim leaned forward eagerly. "Attachment issues stemming from childhood trauma, difficulty maintaining professional boundaries, a history of confusing personal feelings with professional relationships." He gestured to the documents scattered between them. "The same pattern that destroyed your career at Columbia." But Jennifer was no longer listening to Kim. She was watching Jae-won's face, reading the micro-expressions she'd learned to interpret over months of careful observation. The way he removed his glasses when he was lying to himself, the tension in his jaw when he was fighting internal wars, the particular shade of guilt that came from compromising your integrity for someone else's definition of protection. "You don't believe any of this," she said quietly. Jae-won's hands stilled on his glasses. "What?" "These reports, these evaluations, this psychological profile, you don't believe a word of it." Her voice grew stronger with certainty. "You're terrified, and you're trying to convince yourself that letting me go is protecting me. But you know it's not true. Jennifer, the evidence is manipulated." She moved closer to his desk, her green eyes holding his with absolute conviction. "Kim approached Sarah months ago, not for cultural consultation, but for surveillance. Marcus has been tracking me since I left New York, feeding information to anyone who'd pay for it. And your mother orchestrated this entire marriage knowing exactly how it would end, with me isolated, discredited, and deported before I could become a real threat to her family's image." Kim's expression hardened. "Miss Johnson, paranoid delusions are often a sign of someone who's finally learned to recognize gaslighting when she sees it." Jennifer turned to face Kim with the full force of her hard-won clarity. You want me gone, not because I'm unstable, but because I'm not. Because a mentally healthy Black woman with a platform and a voice is exactly what men like you fear most. The office fell silent, except for the distant hum of Seoul traffic far below. Kim's careful composure cracked slightly, revealing the fury underneath his professional mask. Mr. Park, Kim said quietly, I think this conversation demonstrates exactly why Miss Johnson's visa status needs immediate review. But Jae-won was staring at Jennifer with something approaching awe. You knew, he said, about the surveillance, about the manipulation. You knew all along. I suspected, but I needed to be sure. She looked at the documents on his desk. The reports that painted her as an emotional manipulator, the evaluations that pathologized her responses to discrimination and betrayal. Marcus confirmed it this afternoon. All of it. Sarah's betrayal, your mother's orchestrations, even the fact that you've been caught in the middle of something you never chose. Then why are you here? Why not just run? Jennifer smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached her eyes. Because 3 years ago, I let fear make my decisions. I let other people's definitions of my worth become my reality. I let Marcus convince me that I was too damaged, too difficult, too much for anyone to love authentically. She moved around the desk until she was standing directly in front of Jae-won, close enough to see the war being fought behind his eyes. But Seoul taught me something Marcus never wanted me to learn, that the right person doesn't try to manage your complexity or fix your damage. They just show up, consistently and honestly, and let you be exactly who you are. Jae-won removed his glasses completely, setting them aside with deliberate care. Jennifer, I don't know if I'm the right person. I don't know if I'm strong enough to fight my family, the company, the entire system that's trying to erase you. I'm not asking you to fight them. She reached out to touch his face, her fingers tracing the exhaustion around his eyes. I'm asking you to fight for us, for the possibility that love is stronger than fear. Truth is more powerful than convenience, and two imperfect people can build something real in a world designed to keep them apart. Outside, Seoul's neon signs began flickering to life as evening settled over the city. Inside Jae-won's office, two people stood on the precipice of a choice that would define not just their futures, but their understanding of what it meant to choose love over safety, authenticity over acceptance. Kim cleared his throat, impatience cracking through his composure. Mr. Park, the deportation papers can wait, Jae-won said without looking away from Jennifer's face. Director Kim, I think this meeting is over. Excuse me? Jae-won stood slowly, his decision crystallizing into something harder than diamond. I said the meeting is over. And so is my cooperation with this character assassination disguised as corporate policy. Kim's face went white with rage. Mr. Park, if you continue this relationship, your career at this company will be the least of my concerns. Jae-won moved to stand beside Jennifer, his presence solid and reassuring. Because some things matter more than job security. Some people are worth risking everything for. The next morning brought consequences swift as winter wind. Jennifer woke to find her apartment surrounded by photographers, their telephoto lenses trained on her windows like weapons. Her phone buzzed incessantly with calls from Korean news outlets, their questions sharp with anticipation. Miss Johnson, is it true you're being investigated for visa fraud? Can you comment on reports of psychological instability? What's your response to allegations of manipulating Park Jae-won for professional gain? Through her blinds, she watched the media circus grow throughout the day. Vans with satellite dishes, reporters doing live broadcasts from her sidewalk, curious neighbors gathering to witness the spectacle of a foreign woman's public destruction. Jae-won arrived at noon, pushing through the crowd with grim determination. When he reached her door, his usually perfect appearance was disheveled. Wrinkled shirt, loosened tie, the look of a man who'd spent the night fighting battles he couldn't win. "Pack a bag," he said without preamble. "We're leaving." "Where?" "Anywhere that isn't here." His eyes were hollow with exhaustion and something deeper. Defeat, maybe. Or the particular grief that came from watching your life collapse in real time. Kim's escalated everything. "The deportation order is being expedited. You have 72 hours. Jennifer sank onto her couch, the weight of inevitability crushing her chest. So he wins. After everything, Kim gets exactly what he wanted. Not if we fight back. With what? They have Sarah's reports, Marcus's testimony, psychological evaluations that make me look unstable. She gestured at the windows, where camera flashes continued their relentless assault. They've turned me into exactly what they always said I was. A dangerous foreign woman who manipulates kind Korean men. Jae-won knelt in front of her, taking her hands with desperate intensity. "Jennifer, listen to me. My mother called this morning. She wants to meet with you. Tonight." "Absolutely not. She says she has information about Kim's surveillance operation, evidence that could expose everything." His grip tightened. "She also said something about Jin-ho, about why he really died." The words hit Jennifer like electricity. "What does that mean?" "I don't know, but she's the only person with enough power to stop this deportation order." Jae-won's voice cracked slightly. "And she's offering to help. Why would she help me now?" "Because," he said quietly, "I think she's finally realized that some secrets are too dangerous to keep buried." The Han family mansion in Gangnam was a fortress of old money and older secrets, its traditional architecture rising from manicured gardens like something from a historical drama. Jennifer followed Jae-won through halls lined with ancestors' portraits, feeling the weight of centuries of privilege and expectation pressing down on her shoulders. Eun-jung waited in a sitting room that looked like a museum exhibit. Antique furniture, priceless ceramics, and the kind of silence that money bought. She was dressed in a cream-colored hanbok, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant knot, every inch the matriarch whose word was law. "Miss Johnson," she said without rising, "please sit." Jennifer remained standing. "Mrs. Park, if this is another attempt to buy me off, it's not." Eun-jung's voice carried a weariness Jennifer hadn't heard before. "It's an apology, and an explanation you should have received 7 years ago." She gestured to a manila envelope on the coffee table. "That contains Director Kim's correspondence with immigration, his communications with your friend Sarah, and records of payments made to private investigators in New York." Her dark eyes met Jennifer's. "Everything you need to prove that this deportation order is based on manufactured evidence." Jennifer stared at the envelope like it might explode. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because I've made many mistakes in my efforts to protect this family. But destroying an innocent woman to cover up my son's choices isn't one I'm willing to make." Eun-jung's composure cracked slightly. "Especially not when that woman is raising my granddaughter." The admission hung in the air like smoke. Jae-won's head snapped toward his mother, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror. "You knew," he said, "about Ha-eun. You've known all along." Of course I knew. I make it my business to know everything that affects this family. Then why did I pay Jennifer to disappear after Jin-ho's funeral? Why did I let her struggle alone for 7 years? Why did I orchestrate your marriage without telling you the truth? Yoon-jung's mask finally slipped, revealing the pain beneath her perfect control. Because I was a coward who thought money could solve problems that required courage. She stood and moved to the window, her silhouette regal against the garden lights. Jin-ho didn't abandon Jennifer Jae-won. He didn't choose to leave her pregnant and alone. Then what happened? Yoon-jung turned, and Jennifer saw tears tracking down her composed face. He was coming to tell me about her, about the baby. He'd made plans to introduce Jennifer to the family, to ask for permission to marry her despite our differences in social status. Jennifer's hands began to shake. The night he died? The night he died, he was driving here from Jennifer's apartment. He'd just told her about his plans, promised her that we would welcome her once we understood how much she meant to him. Yoon-jung's voice broke. He was killed by a drunk driver 3 blocks from this house, carrying an engagement ring and sonogram photos. The revelation hit Jennifer like a physical blow. 7 years of believing Jin-ho had abandoned her. 7 years of raising Ha-eun alone. 7 years of carrying the weight of rejection that had never actually happened. He was coming to fight for me, she whispered. He was coming to claim his family. Both of you. Yoon-jung returned to her chair, suddenly looking every one of her 60 years. When I found those photos at the accident scene, when I realized he'd been planning to bring a pregnant girlfriend into our world, I panicked. I thought I was protecting everyone by making the problem disappear quietly. Jae-won was staring at his mother with undisguised fury. So you let Jennifer think she'd been abandoned. You let Ha-eun grow up without knowing her father. You let me live with guilt about Jin-ho's death when I could have been helping raise his daughter. I made choices I thought were right at the time. I was wrong. Yoon-jung picked up the envelope, holding it out to Jennifer. This is my attempt to make amends. Kim's evidence is fabricated, his motives are corrupt, and with these documents, you can expose everything. Jennifer took the envelope with trembling hands. What do you want in return? I want my granddaughter in my life. I want my surviving son to be happy with the woman he's chosen to love. And I want to stop making decisions based on fear instead of love. Through the mansion's windows, Seoul glittered like a constellation of possibilities. In that elegant room, 3 people sat surrounded by the wreckage of 7 years of lies, holding the tools to either destroy each other completely or build something honest from the ashes. There's one more thing, Yoon-jung said quietly. Kim isn't just trying to deport you, Jennifer. He's positioning himself to take over the company by proving that Jae-won is unfit for leadership. Your relationship is just the excuse he's using to implement a much larger plan. Jae-won's jaw tightened. What kind of plan? A hostile takeover. With you discredited and removed as CEO, he can convince the board that new leadership is needed. Foreign leadership specifically. He's been courting American investors who want to expand into the Korean market. He's selling the company, Jennifer realized. Everything he's done to me, to us, it's all been cover for corporate espionage. Eun-jung nodded grimly. Which means exposing him doesn't just save your visa status. It saves the company, protects hundreds of Korean jobs, and stops a man who's been using xenophobia as a weapon while secretly betraying everything he claims to protect. The irony was perfect and terrible. The racist director who'd tried to destroy Jennifer for being foreign was himself in league with foreign interests. His nationalism had been performance art, his cultural protectionism a mask for personal greed. "So what do we do?" Jae-won asked. Jennifer looked at the envelope in her hands, then at the two people who represented everything she'd lost and everything she might still gain. "We burn it all down," she said quietly. "We tell the truth, expose the lies, and let Soul decide whether love is stronger than fear." But even as she spoke the words, Jennifer knew the real battle was just beginning. Kim wouldn't surrender without using every weapon at his disposal, and in a city where image was everything, the truth was often the most dangerous weapon of all. The documents hit Soul's media ecosystem like a digital tsunami. Jennifer and Jae-won spent the night strategically releasing Kim's correspondence to journalists, bloggers, and social media influencers, watching as the narrative shifted in real time from "foreign woman manipulates Korean CEO" to "publishing executive exposed in xenophobic conspiracy." By dawn, Kim's carefully crafted reputation was in ruins. Screenshots of his racist emails circulated on Twitter. His communications with American investors were dissected on business news programs, and his manipulation of immigration services became a national scandal that transcended corporate politics. But Kim's response was swift and vicious. If he was going down, he intended to drag everyone else with him. The knock on Jennifer's door came at 6 a.m., sharp and official. Through the peephole, she saw two immigration officers, their faces grim with bureaucratic duty. "Miss Johnson, we need you to come with us for questioning." "I have a lawyer," she said through the door. "Ma'am, you can call your lawyer from the detention center. We have orders to process your deportation immediately, pending the resolution of your visa case." Jennifer's blood ran cold. Despite the evidence they'd released, despite Kim's exposed corruption, the deportation machinery was still grinding forward with the momentum of institutional inertia. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jae-won. "Don't open the door. Legal injunction being filed now. Hold them off for 1 hour." But even as she read the message, Jennifer could hear the officers discussing contingency plans, radio chatter about backup units, the particular language of law enforcement preparing to escalate force if necessary. She was trapped in her own apartment, watching through her blinds as news vans began arriving to document her arrest. The same media circus that had destroyed her reputation was now positioned to witness her deportation, turning her removal into entertainment for Seoul's morning commuters. The courtroom at Seoul Immigration Court felt like a theater designed for tragedy. Fluorescent lights harsh enough to strip away pretense, wooden benches that had witnessed 1,000 broken dreams, and the particular silence that preceded life-changing verdicts. Jennifer sat beside her hastily hired lawyer, watching as Kim's legal team presented their case with methodical precision. Despite the leaked documents, despite the exposed corruption, they were arguing that her visa status remained compromised by her original deception about her relationship to the Han family. Miss Johnson entered Korea under false pretenses, Kim's lawyer argued. She failed to disclose her previous relationship with a Korean national, failed to mention her child's Korean parentage, and has demonstrated a pattern of deception that calls into question her fitness for continued residency. The immigration judge, a stern woman in her 50s, listened with the impassive expression of someone who'd heard every possible story of human desperation and bureaucratic manipulation. "Your Honor," Jennifer's lawyer countered, "my client's initial visa application was completely legal. Her relationship with Jin-ho Park was never formalized. Her daughter was born after his death, and she had no legal obligation to disclose any of these details. The charges against her are based on fabricated evidence produced by a man who's been exposed as corrupt and potentially treasonous." but legal technicalities felt thin against the weight of institutional momentum. Jennifer could see it in the judge's face. Regardless of Kim's crimes, regardless of the manipulation and racism that had brought them here, the system had already decided her fate. That's when Jae-won stood up. "Your Honor, I'd like to make a statement." The judge looked surprised. "Mr. Park, you're not on the witness list. I'm here as Miss Johnson's husband." The words fell like stones into still water, rippling outward with implications that made Jennifer's chest tighten. They'd never completed the marriage paperwork Marcus had interrupted, never made their relationship official beyond their private contract. "I have documentation here," Jae-won continued, pulling papers from his briefcase, "showing that Jennifer Johnson and I were legally married 3 days ago in a private ceremony. As her spouse, I'm requesting that her visa status be adjusted to reflect her new family ties to Korea." Jennifer stared at him with a mixture of awe and terror. Marriage to a Korean national would solve her visa problems immediately, but it would also bind them together in ways their contract never had. This wasn't business anymore. This was Jae-won betting his entire future on a woman who'd spent 3 years learning not to trust anyone completely. Kim's lawyer objected immediately. "Your Honor, this is clearly a marriage of convenience designed to circumvent legitimate immigration enforcement." "Is it?" Jae-won's voice carried across the courtroom with quiet conviction. "Or is it 2 people who found each other despite a system designed to keep them apart?" He turned to face Jennifer, his dark eyes holding hers with absolute certainty. Jennifer Johnson came to Seoul to tell her story. She stayed to build a life. She fought to protect her truth against people who wanted to silence her. If that's not the kind of person Korea needs more of, then maybe we're not the country we pretend to be. The courtroom fell silent. The judge looked from Jae-won to Jennifer to the marriage certificate in her hands, weighing law against justice, procedure against humanity. "Miss Johnson," she said finally, "do you accept this marriage as legally binding and entered into in good faith?" Jennifer looked at Jae-won, at the man who'd risked his career to defend her, who'd exposed his family's secrets to protect her, who'd just offered his name and legal status to save her from deportation. He wasn't perfect, wasn't uncomplicated, wasn't the safe choice. He was just the right choice. "Yes, Your Honor, I do." 6 months later, Jennifer stood in the lobby of their new publishing company, small but growing, independent but ambitious, built on the radical idea that Korean literature could include voices that didn't look or sound like everyone else. Crossroads Publishing occupied 3 floors of a converted building in Hongdae, its walls lined with books in Korean, English, Chinese, and Vietnamese. The company Jae-won had started with his severance package from Daehan was already gaining recognition for publishing stories that challenged comfortable assumptions about identity, belonging, and what it meant to be Korean in a globalized world. Jennifer's novel was their flagship title, published simultaneously in Korean and English, telling the story of a Black American woman's journey through love, loss, and cultural navigation in contemporary Seoul. The Korean translation had sparked nationwide conversations about racism, privilege, and the country's relationship with its growing foreign population. But success felt different now than she'd imagined during her Columbia years. It wasn't about validation or proving her worth to institutions that had never wanted her. It was about creating space for stories that mattered, building platforms for voices that deserved to be heard. "Iyama, look." Ha-yoon's voice carried across the lobby as she practiced piano on the small upright they'd installed in the children's reading corner. At 7, she was fluent in Korean and English, comfortable moving between cultures in ways that made Jennifer both proud and slightly envious. "That's beautiful, baby," Jennifer called back, then turned to Jae-won, who was reviewing submissions at a desk near the window. "Any interesting manuscripts today?" 3 memoirs from North Korean defectors, a collection of poetry by migrant workers, and something that might be the most compelling love story I've ever read. He looked up with a smile that had become her favorite sight in Seoul. "Though it might be too controversial for our other publishers. Good thing we're not other publishers." Through their windows, Seoul stretched endlessly under autumn sky, the city that had broken her heart and rebuilt it stronger. Jennifer thought about the woman who'd arrived here 3 years ago, desperate, hiding, convinced she was too much for anyone to love authentically. That woman had been replaced by someone who understood that the right love didn't diminish your complexity or smooth your sharp edges. It celebrated them, challenged them, grew stronger by embracing rather than erasing the qualities that made you irreplaceable. Her phone buzzed with a message from Sarah, who'd spent 6 months in therapy and was now working as a translator for refugee organizations. Saw the review in Korea Herald. "So proud of you. Coffee this week?" Jennifer typed back, "Tuesday at 2. And Sarah, thank you for telling the truth when it mattered." Some forgiveness was earned through action rather than apology, and Sarah had spent months proving that betrayal could be transformed into fierce advocacy for the people she'd once surveilled. As evening settled over the city, Jennifer watched Ha-eun pack up her sheet music, chattering about piano lessons and new friends and the Korean-American identity she wore as naturally as her favorite jacket. This was Jin-ho's gift to the world, not just his musical talent passed down through genetics, but his daughter's ease with complexity, her comfort existing between cultures without choosing sides. "Ready to go home?" Jae-won asked, slipping his arm around Jennifer's waist. "We are home," she replied, looking around the publishing house they'd built from courage and stubbornness, and the revolutionary idea that love could be stronger than fear. But as they prepared to leave, Jennifer caught sight of a familiar figure through the window. Marcus, standing across the street with the patient stillness of someone who'd been waiting for hours. Their eyes met through the glass, and he raised his hand in a gesture that might have been greeting or goodbye. For 3 years, she'd run from the past Marcus represented. Tonight, she realized she didn't need to run anymore. She was exactly where she belonged, with people who loved her not despite her complications but because of them. Seoul glittered around them as they walked home together. Jae-won, Jennifer, and Ha-eun, an unlikely family bound together by choice rather than convention. Proof that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the courage to write your own ending. The city that had once felt like exile now felt like arrival, and Jennifer Johnson finally understood that home wasn't a place you found. It was a life you built, one honest word at a time. If you're still reading, still believing in love that conquers systems designed to keep people apart, subscribe for more stories that challenge everything you thought you knew about happy endings. Some battles are worth fighting, not because you're guaranteed to win, but because the act of fighting transforms you into someone worthy of the victory. In Seoul's neon-bright nights and coffee shop mornings, Jennifer and Jae-won discovered that the best love stories aren't about perfection. They're about 2 imperfect people choosing each other, again and again, until that choice becomes the foundation for everything beautiful they build together. Love isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to write your own story, you get to live happily ever after in a language that's entirely your own.